Hi, Phil.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much.
So I am really excited to have you as our feature for this week's Shop Small Sunday. Um, Everyone, Shop Small Sunday is something we launched in September. We're all about supporting and empowering each other at Nohble, and to that end, we've launched this initiative, and every Sunday we're going to be highlighting entrepreneurs and creatives who are doing amazing things because 2020 has been a challenge for all of us, and now more than ever, we've really got to be there for each other and help to support and empower each other. So on that note, uh, this is Phil Klay. Phil is an Iraq War veteran and an accomplished writer. He won the National Book Award for Fiction in 2014 and has a new book, Missionaries, that is coming out in October. Phil also happens to be married to my freshman college roommate, and they have three adorable boys together. So thank you so much for doing this, Phil.
Thank you. Really,
So
really fun to be on.
I'll jump right into it, but without giving the whole story away, because obviously you want people to read the book. Um, what is Missionaries about?
So, it's about, I guess you could say, sort of in the modern world, right? The modern globalized world, everything is connected, including how we kill. So, picture in 2016, a Colombian drug dealer orders a 6 foot tall teddy bear for his girlfriend. This actually happened in real life. Unbeknownst to him, the Colombian military had put a beacon inside the teddy bear so that they were able to track it as it arrived at his finca in a rural section of Colombia on the Venezuelan border. When it got there, Colombian forces, aided by American technology, kill him. And that starts a chain of events that brings together a journalist from Afghanistan, an American Special Forces uh, sergeant major, a Colombian officer in the Colombian Special Forces, and a poor kid from that rural region on the Venezuelan border who gets caught up in the violence. And the novel is about how all these different threads and people coming from different wars all around the globe have their fates kind of get interwoven together.
Wow. And so it sounds like obviously the book is fiction, but it has a lot of resonance with things that are actually happening in the real world or have happened in the real world. Um, can you
Absolutely.
maybe share with us a little bit about, from the book, like read an excerpt or two?
Sure, sure. I'll just read, maybe the easiest way to do it would be to just read the first two paragraphs and you'll get a sense of one of the characters' voices. So there are four different first person narrators in the book. And this is Abel. My town sat on top of a small hill by the side of a river whose banks held only sand. At noon, you had to walk quickly so as not to burn your feet, but when it rained, the river would overflow and turn our central street to mud. All us children would go out, slipping and pushing each other, playing in the mud before the sun baked it hard and the wind carried it away as dust. To talk about this part of my life is to talk about another person, like a person in a story, a boy with a father and mother and three sisters, one pretty, one smart, and one mean. A grandfather who drank too much and beat everyone at dominoes, a teacher who thought that boy had talent, a priest who thought he was wicked, friends and classmates and enemies and girls he watched with increasing wonder, like Jimena, who had thick curly hair and fair skin and who got pregnant with the baby of one of the local guerrilleros. Most people think a person is whatever you see before you, walking around in bone and meat and blood, but that is an idiocy. Bone and meat and blood just exists, but to exist is not to live, and bone and meat and blood alone is not a person. A person is what happens when there is a family and a town, a place where you are known, where every person who knows you holds a small, invisible mirror, and in each mirror, held by family and friends and enemies, is a different reflection. In one mirror, the sweet fat boy I was to my mother. In another, the little imp I was to my father. In another, the irritating brat I was to Gustavo. A person is what happens when you gather all these reflections around a body. So what happens when one by one the people holding those mirrors are taken from you? It's simple. The person dies, and the bone and meat and blood goes on, walking the earth as if the person still existed when God and the angels know he doesn't.
Wow, that's really powerful.
Thank you.
Um, I will definitely be waiting for my copy to come in the mail. So kind of along the lines of how did you become a writer? How does
Sure.
one pursue that professionally?
It's always a strange route. I mean, the first thing is uh, a writer is just somebody who writes. So I always, wrote. I always loved reading. I've always found that, trying to put the ideas that I have about the world into stories is the most rigorous way I know to think about something, to kind of like, you know, what is going on? What is all this about? My first book was about the Iraq War, and it began when I just came back from Iraq. I'd been in Anbar province from January 2007 to February 2008 with the Marine Corps. And I kind of got back and I was like, all right, what the hell was that? Right.
Mm.
What was I a part of? Not just like what I was a part of, but what was, what was that experience for everybody involved? What does it mean for us as Americans back home? And I didn't know, but I started writing stories to try and figure it out. And so I think that urge to try and make sense of the world and to try and put it into stories, that's what makes you a writer. As far as how to actually make it into a career, it's tough. I would say it requires patience, luck, and a lot of determination. But it's a kind of strange world. Sometimes a difficult time for somebody to break through and become a writer. But I think that if you continue to work on your craft, you find other writers who can support you. There are great writing programs out there. I joined a sort of official writing program, went to an MFA, but I was also part of a group of veteran writers. That was a free workshop put on by NYU, and I found a lot of great peers who helped me develop my craft. And if you just keep working on your writing, and eventually start putting things out, you'll have things published, you'll get feedback, and you'll grow as a writer.
So it sounds like you felt like you had something that you wanted to learn, you had a story to tell, and that just was like a calling, right? And so you really
Yes.
started putting pen to paper down. How do you then know that you might have something there? Did you just basically start with like having everyone you know in your family, friends start reading and being like, is
Yeah.
this something you would want to read again? Or before it became more of a formalized thing where you were like, all right, I'm really serious about this. I really want to hone this craft. Let me sign up for these different workshops or become part of a program or study it in school or anything that was more
Sure.
um,
Yeah.
once
So
you had already determined.
right. So I had, as I said, I started writing the first stories in my first book when I came back from Iraq. And actually, the first sentence of that book I wrote maybe a couple months after I came back from Iraq. And then, as I was sort of exiting the Marine Corps, I was thinking about this, what I wanted to do. And I had the GI Bill, which is a huge benefit. So I thought that I could go to a program and study writing for a little bit using the GI Bill money, and then I would go on to a program in education so that I could become a high school teacher. That was the plan. Because I didn't think of a writer as something that you could really do for a career. It's at best kind of like, it's always a financially
Passion
dicey
project.
proposition. Yeah. And so the important thing was, that I felt like there was something that was extremely important to me to say, and I wanted to learn how to say it. So because of the GI Bill, I was able to do that, to go to Hunter MFA program, which also, was much cheaper than a lot of other things to begin with. And then worked on my craft there, met other writers there, met mentors, older writers who helped me. And at the same time, I started going to this free veterans workshop at NYU, and I met other sort of peers and writers who I actually, behind me, I have a couple of books of some of the friends that I met there, Elliot Ackerman and Matt Gallagher and Perry O'Brien, who've all gone on to publish books as well.
Oh, that's so
And
cool.
yeah, and I think actually a big thing, a lot of times people think of artists as like, you're like this like lone person in your own head. But to me personally, I found that trying to do something creative, it really helps to have a community. It helps to have other people around you who are supporting you, who are, working on their own projects, who have different ideas, who you can argue with and fight with, and also who can read your work and offer suggestions. And so that was a really critical piece of the project too.
Yeah, that sounds awesome because again, it's something that we over here in Noble really feel very strongly about, right? That we've got to build our own communities. We can't sit around and wait for it to come to us. We got to make it happen ourselves, right? And so I'm really excited to hear that because it sounds like we're on the same page and that this is definitely how you go about figuring out how to help each other through a
Yeah.
pandemic, or how to become a writer, or whatever else it is that is on your to-do list at the moment, right? What else besides getting started would you say is one of the most challenging things about being a writer or being an author?
um, writing is like this weird mix of almost like extreme arrogance and extreme humility, because you have to have this arrogance of like, I have something to say that everybody needs to hear, right? But then once you've jotted that down, you need the humility to be like, oh, this is terrible and I need to rework this and figure out why, what's not correct here. Why is it bad? And you sort of have to learn to be more interested in your mistakes than defensive about them.
I think that applies to lots of different aspects of life,
Yeah.
period.
Right.
So that's a
The other
good
thing
gem, just beyond being an author.
is, if you're doing anything creative, it's like this book took 6 years, right? So, and I think anybody who's doing anything along those lines, like it's this baby that you've put so much time and effort into, and then you just like,
Put it out
you just
there.
put it out in the world, right? And you're just like, I hope people respond. But the best thing in the world is when you get somebody who it really resonates with, and that's I think one of the really beautiful things about what writing can do, about what sort of artistic work can do, is that it is an important aspect of forming community and forming bonds, and sort of getting us outside of our own isolation and connecting us.
100%. So you just mentioned that the book took 6 years.
Yeah.
So along the way, did you ever experience writer's block? And if you did, kind of how did you get over that?
Yeah, so I don't usually get writer's block in the way that people think of it. I mean, if things aren't flowing, I just will read more books, or I do a ton of research. I mean, one of the reasons that the book took 6 years was because I just had to learn as much as I could about the subject. I took a couple of trips to Colombia. It helps having family there. My wife's family is mostly in Medellin, and they were really helpful when I was going and sort of trying to set up interviews and do that sort of thing. So like some days I know what I want to write, and I'll be producing a lot of pages, and some days I'll just be reading. And the more that I read, or the more sort of research that I do, then the more ideas I'll have, and then I'll go back into the text with sort of rejuvenated. But I don't sort of stress myself out if something's not coming. I'll just do something else.
Mm-hmm. That sounds like a great tip just in general also, right? So that if you find that you're stuck, rather than just sit there and like focus on that it might be better to just clear your head,
Yeah.
expose yourself to something new and different, and that might just trigger an idea.
Yeah. Or just go for a run,
Yeah, that definitely. So I know we've talked about some of the way that you got to where you are in terms of your career, but if there's anyone who's listening to this who's interested in pursuing writing, beyond some of the stuff that we've already talked about, what would be a tip that you would have for them, or a recommendation in terms of a starting point?
Sure. I mean, I would say, finding a community, finding other writers you can share work with is really important. And I would just say read a lot. Read everything you can get your hands on, and patience, right? And understanding that like a lot of this is chance is such a big part of it. Marlon James was just utterly brilliant Booker Prize winning writer. His first novel, I think he got it rejected dozens and dozens and dozens of times, because the people that he was sending it to wasn't because he wasn't a great writer. They just lacked the vision to see what he was doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's not it's not something where the road is necessarily going to be smooth, but you need to have a sort of understanding that that's okay. That if you do the work patiently, trying to develop your craft, trying to hone what it is that you want to say, that's the important thing. And that writing is, I think, the most rigorous way of figuring out what you really believe and what you really want to communicate to people. That's inherently valuable in its own right. And eventually you will find other readers that it will be
Yeah.
meaningful for.
That really resonates because it sounds like two things. One of um, just being cognizant that, it's not a straight line. A lot
Yeah.
of people, for example, like in business, think that you like open a business and then it's just, gangbusters from there on, right? And that usually, or almost 100% of the time, everyone's experience isn't that, and it's really a lot about persevering. And then if you know and you have conviction that you have a story to tell and a perspective that needs to be heard, it's to stick to your guns and keep at it, because that's the other thing. Somebody might not see your vision, then you just need to find somebody who does. So I think that that's really, really good, just beyond just being a writer, but pursuing professional anything. So this is called Shop Small Sunday. So on that end, for the big money question of where can we buy this book?
Well, the best thing to do would be to order it from your local bookstore, right? And I'm going to be doing a bunch of events starting on October 7th. And you can see my events listed on philklay.com. And each one of those events will be with a local bookshop, and they'll all have links so that you can purchase the book through there if you want to. But it'll be available wherever, but I would strongly urge people to pick their local bookstore,
Awesome.
especially,
Yeah.
during this time.
Awesome. This has been amazing. Thank you so much for your time and really sharing some of these gems. I have one last question. So if folks have any questions for you specifically, how do they reach you?
I'm on Twitter at Phil Klay, and that's or show up to one of the book events that are going to be happening, and there'll be a Q&A at each one of those, so you can ask it there and put me on the spot.
All right, sounds good. Well, I am waiting for my autographed copy. But thank you again, Phil. And after